But just before we get started, we want to tell you about a new podcast that we're really excited about. It's called DarkTube, TV's Wicked History. The podcast is from Brian Hardigan, who wrote this video and has written several other paranormally listed videos. DarkTube delves into the scandalous, devious, and sometimes murderous past of our favorite pastime. The first season is a deep dive into the shooting death of actor John Eric Hexum. You can find DarkTube at Apple Podcasts and anywhere you find great podcasts. We'll have a link to the podcast in the description box below this video. We highly recommend you check out this awesome podcast. Number 3. Frank Salek. It was a treacherous road to begin with. So as he drove up a narrow mountainside passageway, Frank Salek unbuckled his seatbelt. This may seem counterintuitive, but Salek knew from experience. 33 years earlier, Salek had somehow survived a plane crash because he wasn't wearing a seatbelt. While flying from Zagreb, Croatia to Rijeka, Croatia, the tail section door of his DC-8 came off. And because he was standing near the back of the plane, Salek was sucked out. Incredibly, he landed in a haystack where he watched his plane crash into a hillside, killing everyone else on board. As Salek continued driving up the mountain on that 1996 day, his instincts were right. The inevitable happened. As he rounded a bend, he saw a truck bearing down on him in the middle of the road. With no time to think, Salek swerved. After the truck hit his car's back bumper, Salek found himself careening towards the guardrail. But as his car sped towards certain doom, Salek was able to throw himself out the door, with no seatbelts to unbuckle. Rolling down an incline, he grabbed a tree trunk and watched as his car broke through the barrier and fall into a ravine 100 meters below. As he clung to that tree, he must have thought he was either cursed or blessed. Because this kind of thing seemed to happen to Salek all the time, aside from his miraculous plane crash survival and the car crash. Frank Salek, who was Croatian, had somehow cheated death half a dozen times throughout his life. According to the man himself, the first close call occurred in 1957 when he was 28. A bus he was on crashed into a ravine. Thankfully, the water wasn't deep, so he and the driver were able to get themselves out of the bus and sloshed to the shore with only minor injuries. 5 years later, Salek found himself on a train bound for Dubrovnik, Croatia, when a boulder broke off a mountainside and rolled onto the tracks. Crashing into the giant rock, the train derailed and listed into the river beside the tracks. As water began gushing into his passenger car, Salek smashed a window to escape, helping himself and his grandmother to shore with only a broken arm and hypothermia. A year later came the plane crash. And 7 years after that, Salek's Lada caught fire while he was driving, forcing him to skid to a stop and escape before the car exploded along the side of the road. A similar disaster happened 3 years later in 1973 when a fuel pump malfunctioned in his new Lada. The pump sent flames through the dashboard exhaust ports, giving Salek serious burns. Things were quiet until 1995 when he was walking around Zagreb and he was hit by a crosstown bus. These incidents are enough to give anyone a heart attack, and eventually they did. While walking near his hometown, Dubrovnik, Salek began suffering chest pains and started turning blue. He looked around for help, only to see that he was 50 feet from a hospital ER entrance. After his mountaintop near miss, Salek's rescuers likely told him that he was so lucky he should probably buy a lottery ticket. And Salek, who earned a modest living as a music teacher, did just that. Then he won 900,000 euros in the Croatian sweepstakes. Salek believed that he was blessed after all. He used his winnings to buy a modest house in Petrina, Croatia, where he paid to construct a chapel and a shrine to the Mother of God, the Virgin Mary, whom he credited with his nearly 9 lives. Over the centuries, Mary has been responsible for a number of miracles according to numerous religious texts, including the Lady of Fatima, the miracle at Lourdes, and of course, the birth of her pretty famous son. As for Frank Salek, death finally caught up to him in 2016 at the age of 87, but not before he had given much of his winnings away to friends and family, as a way of sharing his good fortune and spreading his blessing. Number 2. Yasmin Gomes. On a hot July day in 2013, at 10 in the morning, 22-year-old Jennifer Gomes wrestled with labor pains in Linca Graca Hospital, Lourdinha, South Brazil. Soon she gave birth to a baby girl whom she quickly named Yasmin. But immediately there were signs of trouble. Not only did Yasmin's eyes not respond to light, but she was blue. Doctors rushed into action trying to resuscitate the baby. But after working tirelessly for almost an hour, the lead doctor, Aurelio Filipak, legally declared Yasmin deceased. Filipak signed the little girl's death certificate, expressed his heartfelt condolences to the mother, then ordered nurse Ana Oliveira to bring Yasmin's tiny body down to the hospital morgue. But Ana didn't have the heart to put Yasmin in a refrigerated drawer. Not yet. She went about cleaning and dressing little Yasmin as she would any other newborn. She's a little angel, a child, Ana told the UK's Daily Mirror in 2013. I couldn't face the thought of her being sent down to the morgue. So instead, she brought the baby to the hospital's chapel, where she placed Yasmin in a small coffin and set the box atop the altar. The baby's father, Cleverson, eventually went down to see his newborn daughter, but found the sight of her atop the altar too distressing. So he left the chapel and allowed his mother-in-law and a mortician to claim the body instead in order to make funeral arrangements. Jennifer's mother and the mortician approached the altar and looked down at Yasmin. They were shocked when the little baby kicked and then wiggled. Confused and upset, they called in a nurse who examined baby Yasmin and determined her movements were caused by some kind of post-mortem muscle spasms. But then Yasmin took a deep breath and opened her eyes. In the hospital room, Mother Jennifer was sick with grief, trying to come to grips with what had happened, when her mother rushed in to tell her the miraculous news. She said at first she didn't know how to react. She was stunned. But that feeling was soon followed by elation. For his part, Dr. Filipak could explain what had happened. The modern equipment used in neonatal care all indicated that the newborn was clinically dead. It was a miracle, the grandmother told Brazil's Globo G1 website. And it seems like the good doctor was inclined to agree. In 20 years of medicine, Filipak told the media, I've never witnessed anything like this. Every year, nearly 1 million babies born around the world suffer from birth asphyxia. They aren't able to start breathing after they're born and are declared stillbirths. But a few of those million have been known to come back from the dead. A similar incident was documented a year later in Halifax, Nova Scotia, when the baby was born unresponsive and stayed that way for nearly a half an hour. Just as the staff and the doctors had given up hope, and as the baby was being wheeled out of the delivery room en route to the morgue, it started to life and began breathing. Are these cases miracles? The Catholic Church certainly thinks so. In 2010, the Vatican investigated the case of little James Ungstrom in Goodfield, Illinois. He remained unresponsive for over an hour after he was born. This was despite the doctors performing CPR giving him oxygen and shooting him full of adrenaline. Yet, just as the doctors were about to declare baby James legally dead, he sprang to life, breathing and crying. The Vatican declared that case a bona fide miracle in 2019. And today, James is living a healthy, normal life, while his mother, Bonnie, has written a book about her experiences. Yasmin's mother, Jennifer, believes that her daughter was also touched by God. There are no explaining miracles, they happen as God wants, so there must be a higher purpose in all this. Added her doctor, people can make their own conclusions, but only those who are there know what really happened. Number 1. Vesna Vulovic. An agitated man sat in one of the seats of a McDonnell Douglas DC-9 during a routine flight from Stockholm to Belgrade on January 26, 1972. Vesna Vulovic, one of the 3 flight attendants on the flight, quietly cursed the man as he ranted and raved in her section. She too was annoyed. She wasn't even supposed to be on this flight. Another woman named Vesna had been scheduled to work Flight 367. She was only there thanks to a clerical mix-up involving their first names. So Vesna was relieved when, after a quick stopover in Copenhagen, the annoying man didn't get back on her flight. The rest of the trip to Belgrade would be easy, she thought. After all, despite the 100-plus passenger capacity of the plane, only 23 travelers were on the flight that afternoon. When the plane took to the skies to complete the last leg of the journey, Vesna prepared coffee and tea and rolled her drink trolley down the aisle. That's when an explosion ripped through the DC-9. While the cause of the explosion is still debated today, most agree that it was a briefcase bomb in the luggage compartment set off by a timer, likely placed by the man who had left the plane earlier in the day. Regardless of its origin, the explosion ripped the plane into 3 pieces, and those 3 chunks of fuselage began to freefall to the ground 33,000 feet below. Of the 23 passengers and 5 crew, there were no survivors, save one, 22-year-old Vesna Vulovic. Vesna survived not only the mid-air explosion, but the impact with the ground as well, thanks to a number of interconnected little miracles along the way. First, Vesna was in the middle section of the fuselage when it broke up. This cigar-shaped section of the plane was perhaps slowed down by air resistance during its horizontal descent, unlike the smaller, stone-like cockpit and tail sections. Second, thanks to the force of the explosion, Vesna became pinned between a seat and her drink cart. This kept her sitting upright and secure during the descent and ground impact, almost as if she was strapped into a fighter jet's ejection seat. Third, the fuselage landed in a remote wooded area of Czechoslovakia. It impacted a dense forest of massive pine trees, which slowed its fall, before it landed on a slightly inclined ground covered with feet of snow, which acted as a cushion. Next little miracle, the first person on the scene of the crash, a local villager named Bruno, also happened to be a retired army medic. When he found Vesna bleeding extensively in the wreckage, he went to work to stop the bleeding and stabilize her until rescuers arrived. And finally, Vesna suffered from low blood pressure, a fact she kept hidden from her employer's physical exam by drinking lots of coffee. It's believed her low blood pressure kept her from bleeding out while keeping her heart from essentially bursting. Vesna didn't escape the crash unscathed, however. She suffered a fractured skull, a broken back, 2 broken legs, and a broken pelvis. She spent 3 days in a coma after her ordeal, but she did survive. And after a remarkably fast recovery, Vesna became something of a media sensation, a role she would embrace for the rest of her life. After the dark days of Serbia's Milosevic regime, Vesna threw her support and her celebrity behind Democratic leader Boris Tadic. and helped him get elected to the presidency in 2008. It was as if her survival had been, in some ways, designed to lead a better life for an entire nation. Before Vesna died in 2016, at the age of 66, she was asked by the New York Times if she felt like she was the luckiest woman in the world. Much like Salek, she didn't feel lucky at all. "If I were lucky," she said, "I would have never had this accident." Instead, Vesna placed thanks for her survival to the founder of the Serbian Orthodox Church. Because there's one more little miracle connected to Vesna's ordeal. The bombing occurred on January 26, 1972, on the eve of the feast of Saint Sava, who is considered the patron saint and protector of the Serbian people. Thank you so much for watching this video. We hope you found it interesting. If you did find it interesting, please make sure you subscribe. We'll have a new video about the paranormal every week. If you just discovered this channel, please make sure you check out our other channel, Criminally Listed. We have over 325 videos featuring bizarre but true crime stories. You can find it at youtube.com/criminallylisted. We also have a podcast about cold cases that were eventually solved called Criminally Listed Presents Into the Killing. You can find it on Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, and anywhere you find great podcasts. But that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.